video, we're going to be taking a very quick look at the Transformers Legacy Voyager class Siege Cybertronian Soundwave. The figure is essentially a direct reissue of the character that we originally saw as part of the 2019 War for Cybertron lineup, and you're actually paying more to get less. In this case, this Soundwave doesn't include the battle damage deco that we saw first time round, yet since 2019, the price point for the Voyager class figures have begun to steadily increase. So it's really going to come down to if you haven't picked up the Netflix version, or perhaps you never were able to pick up this figure first time round, to if you're actually going to add this here to the collection. And I know, like many of yous, I would have much rather had Hasbro found a loophole to actually get that exclusive Netflix Soundwave here into the main line, or at the very least, what they could have done is taken the Legacy Blaster, swapped the head out here for Soundwave, redecoed him in the Soundwave colour scheme, and they could have called it some kind of Legacy Universe interpretation of the character. I actually would have preferred that when in comparison to this reissue that we're seeing here, but nevertheless, we'll very quickly go over the details, and then I'll actually showcase a fan transformation of how you can kind of get this guy resembling his original G1 alt form. Now, as we take a closer look here at the details, sadly they still haven't changed the colour of plastic here for the eyes, just a simple modification. Had they made this transparent red, I know that it would have made many collectors actually clamour for this more than perhaps they are at the moment, but you can see here the actual cassette deck is a lot cleaner when in comparison to the rendition that we saw in 2019. Is it better? Is it worse? I'll leave that up to you. Personally, I really did like the cracked windscreen that we saw first time round, but I guess this doesn't look too bad, especially if you are after true G1 accuracy. As far as the sculpt work across the board for this guy goes, it looks fantastic. The paintwork is just as good as on the original version, of course this time minus the battle damage deco, although sadly for mine, I have noticed that the elbow joints have already begun to discolour, and I've had this guy for literally 1 to 2 days, so that is a big shame, something that I'm hoping to see the team over at Hasbro perfect for future releases, as in the case of my Netflix Soundwave, it's pretty much ruined. The thighs are completely discoloured, and I'll bring him out for a comparison later on, and considering we're paying more for these figures, we should be expecting better quality back, so I definitely hope that the end to the yellowing plastic does come sooner rather than later, but yeah, it's definitely a decent look for the character. Now, accessory wise, we do get this over the shoulder cannon, which was painted just as nicely as on the first rendition. We also do get this cool concussion blaster, which looks pretty dope, and then for whatever reason they've decided to once again pack in this really peculiar almost stock, which I believe you could actually attach onto the back of Siege Megatron to create that G1 silhouette, but at least for me this has always been tossed in a drawer, and it will more than likely be the outcome here for this version. Now, as far as the comparison goes, here we have our new Legacy Soundwave compared alongside the original 2019 Siege War for Cybertron version. And before we actually get down to the comparisons, etc., I just really wanted to home here in on the elbow joints. As you guys can see, there is definitely a difference between the colour of plastic here for the new Legacy elbows when in comparison here to the Siege version. These have yellowed already, and I've actually had this guy in the collection for 3 years, so I personally don't put it down to the fact that Hasbro weren't able to check the factories. I just think they're using a cheaper plastic now. I really do think the plastic has between 2019 and 2021 and 2022 changed, because this figure holds up impeccably well. There are no areas of which have yellowed, whereas this one sadly has yellowed after a couple of days and probably yellowed in package. But as you guys can see, comparison wise, I do believe the blue is slightly darker here for our new Legacy rendition. You can see the massive difference in regards to the cassette deck. As I mentioned beforehand, I really did think that out of all of the Siege battle damage that we saw for some of the characters, Soundwave definitely did it the best, although I wasn't a huge fan of the scuffing that we had here on the forearms. It definitely does look a lot better being plain like we're seeing here for the new Legacy version, and I actually didn't think the bottom of the legs looked too bad on this figure, but I guess, yeah, the clean deco does look slightly more appealing here for this version. And other than that, I believe that pretty much wraps up the differences. With this version, they did use a slightly smokier tint of yellow for the visor, whereas this one is just completely see-through. So there is that difference, although it is incredibly minute. You may be able to see here at the back, this one's slightly clearer, whereas this one is a little smokier. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below which out of the two do you guys prefer. And here we have the Legacy version compared alongside the Netflix/Earthrise version. Of course, the superior one out of the molds, but at least here in terms of robot mode, they look very similar. So as I mentioned beforehand, if you weren't able to pick this guy up and you're just looking for a faithful G1 representation of the character to add into your collections, robot mode wise, I really don't think this figure here is going to work out too badly. And just to showcase what I mentioned earlier on. You may not be able to see it that well here on camera, but this guy has really began to start to discolor. The color of the thighs is completely different when in comparison to how they originally were when I first got it, and as we come around here to the back, you can definitely see how these sections have sadly discolored. The same can be said here for this, the back of the thighs, even these pieces here which actually attach onto the side of the boombox. So that is a shame to see, especially for a figure of which is so difficult to actually track down. It's not like I can go out now and buy a second version, and even if I did, who's to say that that figure wouldn't discolor as well. So really I'm hoping to see that yellow plastic issue fixed sometime in the near future. But with that being said, let's get this version of Soundwave transformed up into the fan mode, the alt mode that I actually display this character in on the shelf when I do decide to transform him, not that really weird spaceship. So to begin with, you are going to want to detach all of the weapons and set them off to the side. We can collapse the fists in just like so, and then as we come around here to the back, loosen all of this up, fold the head down into this canopy, take the arms, disengage these just like this, fold out this almost aerial section, and then we can snap that there back into place, hinge these sections here out to the sides, peg those in as well. What you'll then want to do is detach this section, which for robot mode can kind of act as a fake ab crunch. I didn't go over the articulation, just as I'm sure you guys all know how this figure works. You'll then want to snap that there into the back, and then come down to the feet, flip these panels open, snap that there into place, and rinse and repeat the exact same process here for this side. So pour all of that in, and then as far as the transformation here of the arms goes, you are going to want to flip these pieces out, snap the shoulders into the hollow pegs that we've got on the underside, and do the same here for this. So far, basically transforming him up into that Cybertronian ship mode is really just the orientation of the legs, which is going to do some of the drastic changes to the overall design. So snap that all in. We can then take these sections here, fold those out, and then finally, you're going to want to take the legs, bring those around to the front, and that is how I personally like to display my Siege Soundwave if I ever do decide to transform him, and I actually think it resembles a pretty decent Cybertronian boombox. Now granted, it doesn't actually stay together too well, the legs are literally just folded to the front, but everything else is pretty stable, and overall I think it does its job. To me, it does definitely give me War for Cybertron / Fall of Cybertron video game vibes, as I do believe that version of Soundwave transformed into something very similar to this. So I'd love to know down in the comment section below, what do you guys think of this fan mode? Is it something that you plan to display your figure on when on the shelf, or will you just stick him in that spaceship mode? Now I'm actually going to jump from this mode into the spaceship mode, then we'll take a look at that communications mode, and then we'll very quickly wrap up the video. So here we have the official mode, and surely the fan mode that I just showcased is so much better when in comparison to this. I still to this day actually don't know what this here is supposed to resemble. Is it a Cybertronian dropship? Is it a Cybertronian ship in general? I really have no idea, but just for a very quick comparison, here we have the new Legacy version. Much like the rest of the figure in robot mode, is basically just a clean representation of what we got here when in comparison to the Siege release. And once again, I actually do quite like the battle damage that we've got here at the top and on the back of the legs. Am I crazy? I don't know, but I guess it's a nice version if you just want a clean incarnation of the character. Exactly the same here from the sides, the front, etc. It really is just that battle damage deco which differs. And finally, here we have Soundwave in the official lamppost or communications mode. I thought it was a pretty nice throwaway Easter egg that they just packaged in on the back of the box for the original Siege version, and it works just as nicely here for our new Legacy repaint. And so, some final thoughts for this Transformers Legacy Voyager class Soundwave. Overall, personally, I think it really comes down to whether or not you're able to pick up the original version or even the Netflix version. There's not much new here at all besides the absence of the battle damage deco. It is identical to that Siege version. It's a pretty decent figure, I can't deny that. The robot mode looks great, and whilst the official alternate mode is a little wobbly in terms of design, I personally really like the look of that fan Cybertronian cassette mode that you can actually get this guy into. And if you weren't able to pick up the Netflix version, then I don't think this here is going to be a bad substitute at all, and considering that it is missing some of those battle damage decos, it does make this a lot more G1 accurate in terms of its colour scheme. I do think it's slightly lazy though. I think that they could have easily changed out the colour of the visor just to make it stand out a little more when in comparison to that original Siege version, and I also definitely think they could have included a minion with this figure, much like we saw with Blaster. Had they given us Buzzsaw, I know many of us would have been clamouring for this release literally just to get the cassette bot, but as it stands, accessories are the same, the figure's the same, it really is just missing a few scuffs and dings in the paint apps. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Will you be adding this figure here to your collection, and do you find it to be that much of an upgrade when in comparison to the original Siege version? I thank you all so much for watching, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.